Welcome to the 9th annual U.S. Media Literacy Week hosted by the National Association for Media Literacy Education. I am Michelle Chula-Lipkin. I am the Executive Director here at Namely. The mission of Media Literacy Week is to highlight the power of media literacy education and its essential role in education all across the country. I'm super excited for our conversation tonight, which is media literacy across generations. We hear a lot and have a lot of conversations about the impact media and technology have on our young people, but what about the effects on older generations? There are over 100 million people over the age of 50 in the US, and by 2030, 1 in 6 people in the world will be age 60 years or over. So this is a super relevant and important conversation. Very excited to welcome our panelists, Lynette Owens, the Vice President of Global Consumer Education and Product Marketing at Trend Micro, and Michael Phillips, Director of Technology Strategy and Relationships at AARP. Thank you both so much for spending some time with me this evening. I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your work. So if you could, Lynette, start us off with your work at Trend Micro, and specifically, how does it intersect with media and digital literacy? And then we'll pass it off to Michael to get the conversation started.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks so much for having me on this important event, I think, and also this very important week that Namely has done a great job of celebrating for the last several years. So my role at Trend is actually one of the world's largest cybersecurity companies. And my role is actually focused more on individual users, consumers of all ages. And so we firmly believe that while we are a technology company, the answer to helping people use technology and the internet in safe and responsible ways can not only be addressed by having great technology, it has to be coupled with education. So my role is to help bring a lot of those two things to individual users of all ages around the world. And over the last several years, we have pioneered a program for younger people and those who care for them, teachers and parents, where we're super active in about 20 countries around the world. So in more recent years, we've been putting a lot more energy and effort towards older generations, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more about our insights and what we're doing to address that part of the population.
Awesome. Michael, tell us what you're doing at AARP.
Michelle, thank you. As Lynette said, it's such an honor to be here, and thank you so much for having this topic be part of the conversation. I lead digital inclusion efforts at AARP and have for a bunch of years. And I think before the pandemic and lockdowns, it was really focused mainly on getting people online to understand the importance of being online, to have the basic skills, know where to get access, and so forth. And then there was an inflection point with the pandemic, and now most all older adults, at least in the United States, are online. Smartphone adoption is over 90%. 98% have some device that has access to the internet. The average older adult in the United States has 6 devices that connect to the internet, including a tablet, smartphone, smart TVs, and such. So now some of the challenges have sort of shifted to having people online meaningfully and safely. And because so many people have recently come to the internet, or just over the last few years, we're learning through our research and our studies and our work with our members, our 34 million members, that that there's a long way to go in making sure that people feel safe, people can recognize the risks that are out there, and are confidently connected to the things that they need to be connected to.
I think those stats that you shared are pretty eye-opening. I'm going to make an assumption that I think a lot of us assume that older people are not using technology or don't know how to, and might be pushing it off until they have to. So could you talk, maybe we'll start with you, Michael, we'll switch it up. What trends, a little bit more about the trends, like what do we know about older people and technology? What are they doing online? What are we noticing about their behavior? If you can share some of what AARP has figured out, and then we'll go to you, Lynette, for your
yeah, and I, the information that we have is very recent, over in the last few months, and it's all pointing to the fact that people over the age of 50 all the way up into 70s and 80s are very interested in doing as much as they can with their devices. Now that they have a smartphone, a tablet, actually tablet usage is higher for older adults than it is for younger adults in the United States, which is interesting. They want to get the most out of it. They want to use it for health. They want to use it for social media, and most importantly, they want to stay connected to the people that they love, friends and family, and understanding how they can do that in a safe way is a priority. The other trend that we're seeing, whereas it used to be a barrier, where cost was a barrier, online access was a barrier, getting set up with networks, with Wi-Fi, with cellular contracts and so forth was the barrier. Now that most everybody is past those barriers, the real barriers become the trusting downloading apps, trusting subscribing to services, trusting social media and what they're seeing, what people are seeing, and having the skills to and knowing where to go to get the skills to navigate safely.
Lynette, anything to add?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that, and I want to make this point as we proceed with this conversation today, that we believe that to really be prepared to enjoy technology and the internet the way that Michael has described, and the way that older adults really want to, it requires some basic actions and some basic knowledge that we are finding older adults are not privy to the information, or because they're not practicing basic things that if they did these things, they could then proceed to, use social media and evaluate content, whether it's an email or a suspicious text or an article, in critical ways, in ways that we want people who practice media literacy skills to do. So, for example, very basic things like locking your phone. About 20% of in our studies, 20% of those 65 and older, there's no lock on the phone at all, and no passcode, no nothing. So if they lost that phone, who knows what would happen. And using things like two-factor authentication. Some of our data shows that 57% compared to other aged adults are using those kinds of basic safety skills, right? So that's just basic digital skills that we're seeing is a gap. And so we really see the answer to this is, I think we need to couple those kinds of basic skills with the more complex and nuanced skills like media literacy. Because once you've done all those basic things, how now do you fully enjoy all that social media, online banking, online shopping can bring to you in ways that in the end will be healthy and productive for you rather than harmful?
It's interesting because I want to ask specifically about really dive into how we do that. But I think it's interesting because when we speak about tech and the digital age, when it comes to youth, we usually frame it in a mental health conversation. And at least you probably have these conversations, but in culture, when we talk about older adults, it feels like we're talking about their vulnerability to scams and their, I don't want to say disregard because it's not that, or their lack of knowledge about passing on information that might not be accurate. Not misinformation versus disinformation. And so I would love to hear from you a little bit more about what you're seeing are the biggest concerns, whether that holds up, like whether it does hold up. Yes, older people really have trouble. They spread a lot of false information out there without knowing, and they're really vulnerable to fraud. I'd love to hear just a little bit more from you about what you're seeing and what your biggest concerns are. Why don't we go to Michael? Sorry, we're now in a groove with two of you. It's going to be that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really great question. And you have to start off remembering that older generations didn't grow up with a smartphone in their pocket. We didn't grow up with double clicking and with social media and mobile devices. And so coming to it, learning it as we do, it's a different process than people who have a smartphone from in their hand from the time that they're in a crib, which a lot of younger generations have had privy to. And a lot of the designers and the developers of the digital experiences come from younger generations, and it's nothing intentional, but the jargon, the language, the click-throughs, the experience, the interfaces are really designed from a point of view of somebody who has always had that phone, which puts a lot of older adults at a disadvantage from the beginning, not always understanding the jargon, and not always being intuitive what the challenges are, what the risks are. You mentioned a locked phone. I think for a lot of us, when we hear you say the phone's not locked, like, oh, they can get right into their somebody's banking account immediately and have access to whatever. But for everybody doesn't think about all of those risks in the same way. I think the other thing is what we hear a lot, people are challenged by the rate of change. So as soon as we learn what the privacy settings or the security settings might be for an app or service or offering that we use frequently, all of a sudden it's changed. It's different. The language, it's somewhere else.
I feel that. I think my kids feel that. Yeah. So older. Yeah.
So it's hard to keep up. When we do consumer testing and consumer panels, the sentiment that we hear over and over is, I don't know what I don't know. I don't even know what questions to ask. Tell me what I should know.
Yeah, that's powerful. Lynette.
Yeah, in addition to everything Michael said, we were also concerned about, are we reaching older generations where they are? And one of the things that we've uncovered in our research is the relationship that older adults have with their adult children. And it's a fairly universal dynamic that we are finding in multiple countries, that the first place that older generations turn to for help of any kind with technology is their adult children or other people in their families or communities they trust. They're not necessarily going to Google, which may be a good thing, actually. If only more of us did that, that might actually be a best practice we could all follow. But more importantly, when we think about, and we did this when we were launching our program 15 years ago for younger people, we knew that we couldn't just have the younger people in mind in our content and in the way we tried to reach them. You had to reach the other people also who played a significant role in their lives. And we're finding that to be the case with older adults, that our work needs to be as much focused on them as it does the people they rely on. We joke about, several of us are the IT people for our families, constantly that you're getting that call saying, I had this email and, should I click on it, or how do I use this Bluetooth device? There's all kinds of different ways that it plays out. But, what I worry about is there enough of us? Because, AARP and Trend, we're only two organizations. And as you said before, so many people are going to be over the age of 60 and not too far from now. So who else out there is joining in on helping? That's my biggest concern.
I think it's interesting though, because my mother, who might be watching right now, I can help her to some level, but then I have kind of only so much, education in tech, like, just because you're media literate doesn't mean you're totally tech savvy. And so that I have limits, but there's also you as the younger adult in your family need to have some expertise, need to have patience, and need to have the ability to teach. Because sometimes just, teaching an older adult or your mother, your father, your uncle is different than just, learning it on yourself, on your own. So that's like a whole new skill that we need to learn. I'm wondering what you have seen over time that has worked, right? So, we know in our community, there are organizations that might have started kind of like you, Lynette, we're talking, it's like we started with the young people, but we're always thinking about the life of a human, a lifelong learner. With our community, we're noticing that those that were focused on youth are now like, wait a minute, like we got to get these skills to the older generation. So what are some things that we know work, and what are some things, even like programs that you've seen that get you really excited, like we need to do more of that? Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, here at AARP, we have we do articles in our publications and online to highlight areas where people can stay safe, or try to stay safe. I think it changes quickly and it's so broad that it's hard to keep track of those things. We also do face-to-face training through our affiliate in Oats and Senior Planet. And I would love to highlight the opportunity for intergenerational learning. We find that there's a lot of opportunities for older adults to mentor younger generations, but when it comes to technology, there's a great opportunity to reverse that and mentor the other direction, and have I think that in all of our programming that we've seen for years, older adults are very receptive to the advice, the guidance, and expertise that come from even teenagers and 20-somethings. So I think that's a big opportunity.
Lynette, what have you been seeing
Yeah.
that?
Well, I'm going to bring in a point that might seem like it's random, but it isn't. I actually, internally in our company, we hosted, as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, we had a guest speaker and experts we're working with on neurodiversity. And the speaker actually made a point that, when you start doing anything focused on one group and you really have inclusion in mind, guess what? So many other groups benefit from that. So, I love the work that Michael and our team actually has had opportunities to interface with the AARP on their concepts of inclusive design. So I think the responsibility lies with so many of us. And I've said that before with younger people too. So to make it safe for younger people, that falls on parents, that falls on education systems, that falls on the platform providers, that falls on, legislators and so on. I think the same thing applies with any age group, with any group for that matter. And so what I'm not seeing, and maybe namely could help, maybe the three of us could help. I see a lot of convenings of that ecosystem for other groups. I don't see it as much, and AARP probably is one of the leaders of this, right? But I don't see it as much in the tech community where I live and breathe. Focused on older adults. There's definitely interest, Michelle, because my contemporaries in all of those other tech companies are saying that, and finally saying, my goodness, everything we've been focused on with younger people, it applies to so many other people. Why aren't we having those conversations? Maybe we start now.
There's so many things. There's so many things that I'm thinking about right now. But one thing that came up a couple of times, the responsibility or the accountability. The point that you made earlier, Lynette, about the phones not having like passcodes, like no protection on your phones. So like if we take that, like who ultimately is responsible for that, right? Like I think about my mother going to the store to get her phone, And at what point is the intervention supposed to happen? And you would think at some level it's on purchase. Like, do we need to think more about the responsibility from beginning to end with technology, from purchase, all of that?
I don't think it has to be that complicated. I think everyone all along the chain should just assume responsibility. If we all just assume that responsibility in every step of the way, I don't think we have to make it overly complicated. Now, I'm oversimplifying because it is complicated, but that would be my dream if everyone just said, I have a responsibility and I will do my part.
Michael, do you have any thoughts about that, about accountability, responsibility?
No, I think that's right. And, I think when listening to you talk and even Lynette's response, my mind went directly to some of the platforms that end up being responsible for a larger share of the frauds, the scams, the stealing of identities in order to scam people out of money. And taking responsibility, if everyone took responsibility, it would go away. The problems would go away. And I think that the more people that we can get on board to put pressure on the organizations to really realize that when their platform is a problem, I think that's an area that needs a lot more attention at every level.
Yeah, I do appreciate that perspective, just because I do think it is really easy to just kind of point a finger and say, you need to be working on this. But I really appreciate the point that it's a shared responsibility. And I'm sorry, Lynette, I cut you off.
No, actually, it reminded me of similar conversations. I want to say it was probably Media Literacy Week in 2016, 2017, when we first were just hit with the wave of misinformation and disinformation and struggling as a public to just figure it out. And I remember so many coalitions saying, I pledge to do something about this issue. And we all know that those words fell flat. The problems persist, have gotten worse. So I suppose it is too much. I'm being too much of a Pollyanna saying everyone should just assume it, because people were signing those kinds of pledges to privacy, pledges to fighting misinformation, pledges to this, that, and the other, private, security by design. But without enforcement, it, unfortunately, right, there's too many competing powers, mostly profit, that prevent us from really realizing that utopia.
Yeah. Okay. We have some activity in the chat. So I do have some other questions, but I want to take a moment to just read some comments. So Jennifer, hi, Jennifer. To Michelle's point about not having enough of us, are there any YouTube channels or other services for older adults that teach exactly these skills? I keep thinking that would be great. In my family, I'm tech daughter for my 77-year-old mom, and she continues with, is that type of intergenerational learning something that AARP or Trend Micro would be able to fund if there was a provider? And she says, hi. So I guess the thinking about the intergenerational learning, and also thinking about, are there things that we can direct our older family and friends to watch to give them information?
Yeah, seniorplanet.org is
I'm going to put that in the chat right now.
Yep, and there are online safety and misinformation training classes that are free, that are available for people who sign up. So I think that's a great place. And yes, Jennifer, you read Lynette and my mind. We think there's a lot more opportunity, and we are hoping to maybe next year we can be here talking about some really big successes in that area.
I love that. Lynette, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do. I wish I could point you to a URL that Michael did right now, because it's Watch This Space. We're actually working on, similar content, but designed in a way that co-person, that co-family member you, Jennifer, with your mother, could actually use together, so that there is that it's not left to someone to have to do it all on their own. And what's interesting is, I just wanted, this is sort of an aside, but there are cultural differences with regard to aging and intergenerational dynamics. When we're finding, for example, in Japan, where arguably the generation is the oldest of anywhere in the world, and they're really struggling with this problem. They respect elders probably more than several other cultures do, but older adults are too embarrassed to ask that adult child for help, so they don't do it. And this is also creating, exacerbating the problem. So there are probably people like that in any country, in the United States as well. So that's what one of the things we're trying to figure out is if they're too embarrassed, or they feel like they're a burden on the people who love and actually care for them and want to help them. Are we meeting them where they are? Right. Meaning they still may need someone with them, but what if they don't want to bother that adult child? Who else?
That's so funny. That's what, yeah. So when it's interesting, because my mom recently, I noticed that my mom stopped calling me and she was texting me. And I was like, Mom, why don't you just call me? Just call me. If I can't pick up, I won't pick up. But she's like, I don't want to bother you. And I was like, gosh, when did that become like a norm? I was like, you're my mother. You can bother me whenever you want, and but my daughter will FaceTime me, she will FaceTime. It's interesting, those norms. But what you're saying also is the cultural differences, the way we interact intergenerationally really plays a role. Why don't we talk for a sec?
Michelle,
go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted to respond to a couple of things in the chat there.
Oh, great.
There were several comments about youth teaching older adults, and which is a fantastic idea. We also, through Senior Planet and Oats, there are also some curriculum that's already been developed. And I'm pretty sure there's online safety curriculum. I know that there is how to use an iPhone, how to use a tablet type for curriculum that has online safety built in, but I think there's some specifically, and that curriculum can be used by local organizations to train older adults. So AARP and Oats wouldn't be the organizer, but we have the curriculum. So if there's local organizations that are boots on the ground, maybe a library, maybe a speaker center, maybe a worship service group that has access to youth that need community service or are willing to do that training, the model works so well. We provide the curriculum, you provide the space and the marketing, and it's very impactful.
That's great. Yes, Gretchen was adding a lot about her work or public libraries. So inspired as a public library worker to start programming for older adults and get into intergenerational programming, which is awesome, Gretchen. We love that. I'm wondering if we could just talk, since we were talking about like differences of culture, what else we're noticing? You both work globally, and I'm wondering what you're noticing across the board and what you notice. Are there other differences? Or, I think this is a global issue. What are you seeing? Michael, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, I can. It's definitely a global issue. And we have higher rates of online participation from older adults here in the United States and other countries, but other countries, lesser developed countries and middle income countries are catching up, and that means people are coming late to technology, which also is challenging. The other thing that I've learned in the last year, working more with the United Nations and other organizations that are creating this, is that other countries have challenges that we don't have in the United States, like censorship issues, like gender discrimination issues, where in some countries women aren't really permitted to do certain things online, and and government control and those sorts of things. So those countries have all the same challenges that our older generations have, plus other challenges which need to be addressed.
Lynette, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually want to address the opposite, which is what we're seeing that makes it the commonalities that we're seeing around the world. And we saw this with our younger with students program, and that is the issues that were of greatest concern, risks for younger people, were not that different around the world. The way that they might play out and the way you might address them were different around the world, depending on where you were. But if you worried about cyberbullying, if you worried about misinformation, if you worried about, privacy issues, these were pretty universal. So at least from what we're seeing so far as risks and concerns go, these are pretty universal from our perspective around the world. But as Michael is saying, that it's the way that you will go about addressing it that matters most. Here in the United States, if the US government were to say, unfortunately, these days, we're going to, demand media literacy education in every school across the country, which I know, namely, you're a big proponent of, as is Media Literacy Now. But people may look at that sideways and suspiciously, where in other countries, they trust their government and they want to, and it will get funded. It won't just be some unfunded mandate, right? And so, that's what we're trying to figure out is how can we best participate in the ecosystems, wherever they may be, that will be most efficient, will be most effective, right? And I have always believed that you cannot say, I'm doing this all on my own, that it has to be coalitions of people. You can never do any of these issues are too big. And so, that's our intention, is everywhere in the world. In Japan, we're already, I think we're being sought out already by the Japanese government to assist there, because the older people that are not going to their children for help, they're going to the government, they're going to the police, like they're asking for help in the mobile shops, right? So like, okay, then let's empower the mobile shops. Since that's where they all seem to go for that help.
I love that. Like where, where are they? Yes. So what about, one of the things that I've been thinking about as you've been talking is, oftentimes again, maybe an assumption, but I'm thinking about older people in their lives, right? Like in their daily lives or whatever. But the work thing is interesting because all the folks that are in, are professionals, they are at work, and the technology is changing. And I would imagine at some point there's a generation of those in the workforce that are at a disadvantage because they don't know the new technology, or they don't have the new the skills that they need. I'm wondering what we know about that. Like, how is it impacting older people in the workplace, and how are companies trying to address like technology learning in the workplace? Is there anything we know about that?
I don't know that I have any data points, but certainly from a trends perspective, I think you articulated it really well. There's a lot more data coming out about how workforces, whether it be companies, organizations, or regions, communities, countries, workforces that have higher digital skills provide more economic gain to their organizations or communities. So there's definitely an ROI in investing in upskilling workers to meet the demands. And the other thing, as you were talking, people who are outside of the workforce now are getting left behind from a lot of the organization people who are participating on a daily basis. So these are real concerns, and I think that they're just being exacerbated by the rate and pace of change.
Yeah, and I don't know if I would limit this issue to just the workplace. And Michael, it triggered a conversation we had in the past, and that is, if in your everyday life, all of your information about your doctor's appointments now are on an app. It's not getting a letter in the mail and saying, don't forget you have an appointment next month at this date and time. The only way now that you'll have any of that information is through an app or a website. And so we're leaving people behind. And, again, I think that's got to be addressed by assumed responsibility in all parties. Am I saying that if a doctor's office or a medical practice chooses to move everything digital, should they couple that with a little bit, like, offer a training session for their patients? They should call you at AARP or the Senior Planet or Oats to assist in that. I think those are the kinds of things, those are the creative things, I think, that maybe they're happening in pockets around the world and country,
Yeah.
but it's not common that I know of.
That is such a good point, Lynette, because I find like no one has ever offered me any help with those things, right? Like it's just you got to figure it out. And I have, some skill. I'm used to it now, but certainly like it can get very overwhelming, especially as you get older and you have more doctors and you have more things to keep track of. And there's a lot of support for these thoughts in the chat. And Gretchen brings up U.S. citizens who have trouble with English and tech. It is like you would think that hospitals and doctor's office do need to provide some kind of education and just assume that education is needed. I think that's a really interesting point.
Obviously the health space has its own challenges, and health equity gets exasperated. The fintech and financial space has its own areas. We've heard stories, one out of Uganda, where the federal government gave some subsidies to older adults during the pandemic, and only 23% were able to take the electronic funds because they didn't have access.
Yeah, that's huge.
If you look at like applying for a job, and people who have higher skills can have access to those jobs. People who maybe didn't use technology in their previous jobs are at a bigger disadvantage, and is driving more disparities in that regard too. So it's a complex. It is.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to remind people that are watching to please continue to add your comments, but any questions you have for us, we will definitely pull them and ask them. So we already mentioned, I think 2016 was mentioned. There was a lot of noise around the 2016 election and the amount of fake news older people shared on Facebook, right? That was like a major headline. It was, older people were doing it wrong. We have a presidential election next year. I think every one of us in the media literacy space is highly aware of the potential of the next 10 months of information, the information ecosystem and what we're going to see. We can make assumptions about that it's going to be a tough environment, right? So what do we need to do for older generation, specifically around elections, and making sure that they get reliable information, making sure they understand what to share, what not to share? What are you all thinking about right now? I'm not going to ask you to say this is what we're doing, but what are you thinking about right now? And I assume it's very much on your minds. Lynette, why don't you go first this time?
I'm thinking that we need to revisit that Parent's Guide to Media Literacy and create a new one called A Family's Guide to Media Literacy, where we're modeling potential conversations that happen at the dinner table and how you can maybe learn from those scenarios and and steer conversations in a way that will ultimately be helpful. I am completely riffing here live with you all, but if we all want to get together and make that happen, I think that's something immediately I think we could provide. But beyond the creation of great content, I think we need to keep having these conversations whenever and wherever we can have them. I don't know. It's a big question.
Yeah, I
I feel
know.
like
I'm sorry. I
every
threw that one at
election
you.
is like
You're not going to solve this
yeah.
problem right now. Come on, Lynette.
Sadly, sadly, no.
Like we're all waiting for the shoe to drop.
Mm.
Like, you know, generative AI and deep fakes have come even further than they were 4 years ago, and we're just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop so that we, you know, so that we can react. But I heard someone from Google say the other day that it's no longer worthwhile to teach people to spot deep fakes or to spot, you know, altered, because you can't. The technology is too good. You can't. You have to go to the source, and you have to figure out if the source is reliable or not. And teaching people that is got to be everybody's job. I was heartbroken a couple of weeks ago, or last week, it was a couple of weeks ago now, when all of these images started coming out of the Middle East, and some of them were real and some of them weren't, and there was no way to really tell which was which. So people's you know, political views were just the flames were fanned based on what they were seeing, and we know that that's the potential here. For if there's anybody in the audience who is working with youth, I just want to say you have a really great opportunity to encourage youth to be on social media, helping their family members, remember how to search, how to look for how to spot misinformation and fake news and deep fakes. You know, I think that it's a little bit unfortunate that some of our social media platforms have kind of taken a generational turn. So you know, there's not a lot of multi-generational contact going on in some of them, unfortunately. But where there is intergenerational contact, especially amongst family members, we all have to be holding ourselves accountable, our family members accountable, and you know, encouraging cross generations to be there on those platforms that are intergenerational will help.
It's such a good point
Yeah.
that, you know, because as soon as the adults get to a platform, the young people go somewhere else. And like, I get that. Like, I totally get that. I was that way when I was young, right? If people were gathering at a restaurant, we would go somewhere else where there were the young people. I do think that it is interesting what I have noticed, and again, maybe this is where I'm like an optimist at heart, is that it does feel like I can see even on my social media feeds that there is more back and forth about where this information came from. Is there a source to this? I'm hearing something else. Like, there's a little bit of detective work that's happening that what I was not happening in 2016 for sure. And I do think that, you know, the 2016 election and kind of the rise of fake news and cultural conversation, but also everything that happened with the Cambridge Analytica breach. These were times where the general public was like, wait, I don't understand. Social media takes our data. Like, what? And now I do feel like we are asking much deeper questions about privacy and about data mining and all of these things. And that has happened in a pretty short time. So I know we have a lot of work to do, but I think something is shifting. And again, maybe that's just because I'm in the media literacy space and that's all I see, but I'm wondering if you see progress in that way.
Yeah,
I definitely do. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Michael.
No, go ahead, Lynette. Yeah.
I definitely see this shift. I mean, I think the language with which people are referring to the issue in public spaces, on television, you know, kids are even using fake news in humorous ways.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fake news, meaning you're lying, right? They're
Yeah.
just using the word "you're lying" right? Interchangeably with that. And I have to give kudos to all the educators who are on the call or wherever you are, and to Namely, and to so many of the members of the Namely community for the work that they've been doing. It's slow and steady, has been what was needed, rather than big, you know, grandiose movements like signing, you know, being parts of alliances and pledging this, that, and the other. I don't feel like those have been as effective as the everyday work that is happening in classrooms, in families, in communities. I definitely see the shift. My only concern is that that people have become so skeptical of. It's almost like, yeah, it's definitely verify. Don't trust anything before you do. Um, I feel like in some ways it's very dystopian for me, and I also prefer to be an optimist and live in a world that's a little bit brighter. So I don't know if we'll be able to find that happy medium, but maybe this is the stage we have to go through now before we get to that other side. And thankfully, as you have observed too, things have shifted.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping we'll see in the course of the months and weeks leading up to the election that that there'll be a lot more fact checking, not by you relying on third party to do it, that you yourself are doing it.
Yeah.
And encouraging those in your direct sphere to do the same.
Yeah, I echo everything Lynette said. I think we're doing a lot better with a lot of the things that have been around for a while. I think what worries me are the new threats, and the voice cloning and the video cloning, and I'm sure next month it'll be a different new threat. And we all have to learn to adapt with each of these, recognize and adapt with each of these new threats as they come. And unfortunately, the bad guys out there are so creative. So how do we keep people up to date on what's new, what's what should we pay attention to that's today that maybe didn't even exist 6 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that what I always say when people get really stressed about the changes in technology, and there's a lot of fear around AI, is what I always say very confidently is that yes, there are bad actors and there are individuals and groups that are going to try to do evil with these tools. But I also know that there are very good actors that are right now thinking about how they counteract all of that, right? Like all of that there is a lot of work being done to stay as far ahead as we can and be prepared. And I think about that all the time, especially in Lynette, with what I know about your work, the way that you think about, your company thinks about cybersecurity and all of that stuff. Like it always makes me sleep better to know that there are people that are working on this really, 24/7 to help us navigate whatever threats are coming. There's very smart people working on it.
Yeah, and I think we will always be in this race, and we've been in it for forever. Right? As soon as the internet was born, we had to be vigilant. We had to be creative on how to counter these kinds of threats. Yes, they're more intricate and complicated and than ever before, but we're not the only ones. Like there's a lot of other great organizations, NGOs, tech, and even legislative bodies that are really trying to do all that they can. I do think though that if I could just put out a call to action,
Yeah, please.
something that people can do. We may all have someone, an older adult or adults in our lives, whether they're our parents or neighbors or whoever they are in our communities. There is an area that we've been really trying to push on and encourage people to do. And it may not be directly related to misinformation, but it starts it's a chance to have conversation at a family or community to help older adults because the country and the world is aging. But many people in that age category are trying to enjoy the benefits of technology. There will come a point, and this is even true for ourselves, where we really need to plan for down the road. And so the conversation that we've been trying to promote in the public is around, preparing your digital estate, right? And today what you can do, and the conversation you can have with the older adult in your life is, hey, let's just take stock of am I in the ether, right? Where do I keep all my passwords? Where's all the photos that I want to make sure are safe and going to be there for anyone in the future to have access to? Have I thought about setting a legacy contact for my Facebook page and my wishes for it, how I want it to be memorialized, or for your iCloud account as well, and it was interesting having to go through this myself, for my mother, that these were conversations people weren't having. And then when something happens, either, an older adult has to go into assisted living, and someone has to take over and care for that. Don't wait. These are conversations we can all have today. These are things that can bring us together around the topic of technology and prepare, for the future. And while we're at it, make it a conversation you have, regularly. Not just about where your stuff is and how you want to keep it safe and do you want it memorialized and so on, but other topics related to what we're seeing and doing on the internet. As a parent, when my kids were growing up, and now they're much older, but when they were still starting to navigate social media, it was really fun to just ask them, like, their day and how much they were seeing the world through social media. Social media was their window about anything, any current events that were going on around the world. And by asking, you started to get a sense of, wait, where did you hear that? And maybe we should talk about this. And, did you verify that somewhere else? It was interesting to see how easily they were persuaded by, because they saw it and then their friends were all, liking it, and it just for them became truth. And so those are similar conversations we can be having beyond digital estates, or just how are you conducting yourself on the internet? Where do you go? What do you see when you go there? I think we have to have those conversations even with the older adults in our lives.
Definitely. Michael, do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, and I agree. Everything Lynette said was articulated so well, and I love the thought of sitting around the dinner table or sitting around the family table and having intergenerational conversation and learning from each other and hearing from each other on that. That's a powerful tool.
Yeah, and I think that, I always think about, my mom or my mother-in-law following my daughter and her, music career on Instagram, or my sons, like that they do get that connection that they really want. And, at some point, now that my kids are a little older, they appreciate that there's always that window where it's like, don't comment. But after, it's like nice to be connected in that way, for sure. So again, we have a few more minutes. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But I want to kind of look ahead now, and my magic wand question, which is, in 5 years down the line, what do we hope for in this space, right? Like, what do we hope the landscape is for older adults and the digital world? And I'm wondering if we can dream. It's 5 years from now. What would you like to see? Michael, why don't you start?
Yeah, I would like to see more training programs in communities, at the libraries, at the senior centers, at the places where the Dunkin' Donuts, at the places where people go. I think that what we've seen is that requires sort of three components. It requires an organization in community, it requires curriculum, and it requires somebody to fund, whether it's the government, whether it's a company, whether it's a church. Somebody has to kind of fund it and advertise it, bring it together. But I would love to see more of that. And then secondly, and I'm going to focus on industry for just a second, I would like to see the platforms taking a bigger focus on across all of the different types of risks that are out there that are affecting older adults. I think there has been a focus on some risks because platforms have been made or forced to focus on that. So I would like to see a bigger focus on that. There's no reason why we can't get our hands around people impersonating other people on major social media platforms. That's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Lynette, how about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo and jump on the first point that Michael made about, a wish, not just of platforms, but of anybody developing technology that might be used by any generation.
Mhm.
In addition to making sure you're making it accessible and safe for everyone, I think I want to echo again this co-usage, intergenerational dynamic. Build your products knowing that maybe
Yeah.
it's just not the individual user. Maybe it's being used together with someone else. And we got this feedback even from our own product development. Was there a way that if you were trying to keep someone safe, that someone else who cared for that person could co-use it with that person? I do not see that as a best practice. I think, again, acknowledging that this is the dynamic when it comes to technology. Older adults rely on adult children, and build that into the way you do what you do. Second, and this is more of a plug for our industry, there are 3.5 million unfilled jobs in cybersecurity. There is a breach every 5 minutes, I feel like. And we could go on a whole conversation on breach notifications and misinformation, by the way. What are you supposed to do and who you're supposed to believe when you hear the news, right? Because the companies are very defensive, saying, no, everything's fine, it's not so bad. And then you find out 30 days later, oh, actually, all this other stuff was leaked of yours. That's a different topic. But the AARP has these great sort of terminologies, categories of phases of your life. And Michael, I have to just bring it up. I love the phrase career encoring. I think it's a great way of
Oh, I
phrasing
love
that.
that.
But if you ever want to consider in your career encoring phase, being retrained to fill any of these roles in cybersecurity, you don't have to be a coder. There's many kinds of roles you could do. I mean, that's a gap right there. You have an aging population,
Such a good
many of
point.
whom are going to retire and want to do something else. Because I'll tell you, being in this company for 22 years and in this industry, we're the good guys trying to fight the bad, and guys and gals, and we need people. So that's one of my wishes if I had a magic wand.
That would be, could you imagine just like a training program that all seniors are now cybersecurity? Yeah, like that is a film I want to see. Like we need to work on that right now. I think that, so we did have one question about looking for those jobs. Like where are those jobs posted?
Well, I think I'll have to, yeah. Sorry, hello?
I can hear you. Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have some at trendmicro.com, but and we actually even have a program where we invite, it's in a smaller scale, right? We invite people to come in who have no previous training at all in cybersecurity and give you some of those skills. And maybe you go off somewhere else to work ultimately, but not, at Trend. But I think if there's a place, Michelle, that we could continue to, maybe it's through Namely's communities, I'd love to come back to you and provide that
I
information
love
to your
that.
membership
Yeah,
and
that's
viewers.
fantastic.
There's so many, and I think that the need is so great that anybody out there who is hiring for those kinds of jobs, make sure you lower the bar. Don't be so exclusive in how you write the job descriptions, because I think it's upon us to train people, right? You can't say you already have to have XYZ coding language. I mean, we're never gonna solve this gap if that's our attitude. We're responsible to train. And
I
then
love it.
enjoy.
Wait, I have like ideas for at least 4 more webinars that we'll do next year, including career encoring in tech. I love this. Well, we're at top of the hour. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Michael and Annette, for talking through this with me. I think it's so important. While, we spend a lot of time in the K-12 space and the higher ed space, thinking about continuing education, thinking about media literacy as a lifelong skill, and that we're all lifelong learners, and that continuing education has to be a priority. This conversation was just so helpful in how in me and like to me and how I've been thinking about it. So thank you so much. And I appreciate your time, and we'll keep talking. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for being here, and please reach out if you have ideas or opportunities.
Awesome. Have a good night and have a good day,
Thank
Lynette.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.